Hi everyone, this is Nathan from Snap Surveys and welcome to another of our Snap XMP webinars. Today we're going to be looking at the use of logical expressions in Snap and their use within analysis filters. We'll also be looking at how the same expressions can be utilised within routing rules. It should take about 30 minutes and as ever, there's plenty of resources available on our support hub which I'll be pointing you to at the end. We'll begin with the very basics of filtering just to make sure that we're all on the same page. We'll then move it up a notch, looking at filtering on multiple questions at once and perhaps introducing you to some filter expressions which you didn't know were available to you. I'll then be looking at how similar expressions can be used to route your respondents around your forms and finishing off looking at how derived variables can be used to power up your routing. Okay, let's head into the software to begin. To begin with, I'm going to be working within Snap Desktop, and that's mainly as it's going to be easier for me to demonstrate how the filter expressions that we're going to be using will affect the data. It's basically just easier for me to use as a teaching tool, but you'll see later that all the expressions and logic that we discussed today can be used just the same in Snap Online. It's just perhaps not quite so easy to see how it's working in the background. I'll be using the in-crowd survey, which has 160 cases or completed replies. You can see at the bottom I have 3 web editions, a PC, tablet and smartphone, and there's also a paper edition. But in terms of analysis, data is data, so it really doesn't matter how data gets into that survey. I'm going to move into the analysis tab today, which is just an extra edition that I've created and formatted with the checkboxes on the right. But just to confirm, this edition isn't actually used for interviewing, it just allows me to perhaps use bigger fonts and, as I said, perhaps format the tick boxes to the right. Now you're probably aware that when it comes to analysis and also routing, we use a position or code position to determine which answer we're referring to. Looking at question 1, answer yes is code 1 and answer no is code 2. And just to confirm, each question starts back at number 1. So for question 2, the once before answer again is code number 1, with monthly being code number 2. In larger questions, rather than manually having to count down the codes, if I was to click on a few times a year and then look at the little grey bar, the selection bar at the bottom, we can see it's question 2, but more importantly, it's code 3. You can see there's also a little bit of information about the question itself, so it's a single choice question and it's a single response. As we move into filtering expressions, the most basic or simple expressions are going to be in relation to single response questions, and they're going to relate to just one question. If I move into data view mode, to begin with, we are looking at case data, so it allows us to scroll through each person one at a time individually. So you can see how each person has responded, but I'm going to drop down the menu and change it to counts, and now we're looking at all 160 people on the page. We can see that 99 people said yes and 59 people said no, and if I come down to the demographic questions 8 and 9, we can see 37 people were male, 82 were female, and 37 said they'd prefer not to say. I'll go ahead and apply a filter. So we're going to filter on the gender question. So if I start by typing Q8, because we're referring to question 8, and then equals 2, so 2 identifying the females. If I click OK, we can now see we're left with the 82 people, and just to confirm, the remainder of the survey is now for those 82 people. So for the 11, 18 to 24 year olds, those are females, and also the 21, 25 to 39 year olds, they're also females. If I wanted to then reference an age group of those females, so perhaps the 25 to 39 year olds, which would be Q9 equals 2, we can then join these short expressions together using operators, which are either in the form of words or symbols. So I'll go back up to the filter. And if I type in Q9 equals 2, and then in the middle of that, we can use the word and. If I click OK, we can see we now have 21 females who are 25 to 39. So by using the word and, we're saying that both filter expressions have to be true. So the participants identified have to be both female and 25 to 39. If I was to replace the word and with the word or, we're going to get a completely different result. So now we're saying that the participants identified can either be female or aged 25 to 39. They could also be both. So basically pick out anyone who is at least one of these things. Unlike and, or can be used to filter multiple answer choices within a single response question. So if I go back up to my filter, and I'm going to replace what we have in there at the moment. So initially we're going to look at question 9, and I'll say Q9 equals 1 and Q9 equals 2. If I click OK, you'll see I get no results. And that's because when completing the survey, it's actually impossible to be both of those options. I can choose to be either option 1 or option 2, but what I can't be is both of those options. So if I go back in and replace the and with an or, this time we should get some results. If I then want to also include the 40 to 59-year-olds, I can simply add another or at the end. If I go back in, and we can just say or Q9 equals 3. This could also be expressed as not Q9 equals 4. So show me everyone who did not choose option number 4. Now, as I mentioned earlier, these expressions can also use operator symbols. So I'm going to move back into my PowerPoint now to show you a few additional examples. So starting off with our first example, we said Q9 equals 1 or Q9 equals 2 or Q9 equals 3. The equivalent symbol to the word or would be a comma. So Q9 equals 1, comma, Q9 equals 2, comma, Q9 equals 3. This could also be shortened down with the use of brackets. We could say Q9 equals, and then popping the 1, 2, and 3 in brackets, again with the commas. And as we saw, rather than saying display options 1, 2, and 3, sometimes it's quicker to say don't show option number 4. If you're perhaps a bit more used to playing around with these types of expressions in Excel, then you might be more familiar with the greater or less than symbols. Personally, I tend to get confused which symbol is which, but here we're saying that Q9 is less than or equal to number 3. Or finally, we could say Q9 is less than 4. So here we've identified the same respondents, so everyone in the first 3 age groups, but we've expressed it in 6 different ways. And using these shorter expressions help to avoid mistakes when we start to build up these more complex expressions. Ultimately though, whether you pop things in brackets, whether you use the greater or less than, whether you use the word not, it's entirely up to you. They all work. It really just depends what makes more sense in your head. Now, I just wanted to show you a couple of filters that can be used specifically for multiple response questions. Using num, so N-U-M as the operator word, means that I can identify respondents who gave no more than one response to question number 3. So it would be expressed as num Q3 greater than 1. And because num is used, the number 1 at the end isn't referring to option number 1, it's actually referring to the number of responses to that question. It may also be useful to identify respondents who selected one specific response to a multiple response question. Q3 equals 1 identifies those who exclusively chose social media as their response and nothing else. So many people would have chosen social media as well as a few other options, but Q3 equals 1 is the people who chose social media and nothing else. The examples I've shown you so far have all been based on closed tick box questions, but you can also apply filters to an open style question. So for example, date response questions can use expressions based on year, month, and even weekdays. My first expression is searching for a particular date range, so this could be useful if you're filtering based on financial quarters, although in this particular example I'm just searching for the entire 2026. Also worth pointing out for our American listeners who list the month first followed by the day, your installation snap is set up, or should be set up, to use the US format. As I'm currently searching for the entire 2026, this expression could actually be shortened down by making use of the word year. So Q10 year equals 2026. And by making use of the word and then month, we could then also search for the first 3 months of the year. So year equals 2026 and month equals, in brackets, 1 tilde 3. Just remembering that tilde is just the same as me typing the word 2. If you're doing comparisons based upon days of the week, you could also make use of the word weekday. So weekday equals 1 is a Monday and weekday equals 7 would be a Sunday. We could also try and automate it a little bit using the word today. So Q10 today month would pick out anyone who's arrived this particular month. And then if we follow that with Q10 today month minus 1, that will pick out those people who arrived last month. So it's going to be dynamically picking out the current month or the previous months. And that's quite useful when you're doing your reporting, because you quite often want to report on this month and then comparing that to -1, -2 and -3. For literal response questions, we could use the expression Q6 equals and then in speech marks friendly staff. So that's going to pick out anyone that's used that particular string. And if you're doing any work with time response questions, then just like we use the word year and month, you could also use the word hour and minute. So we've seen that operator words and symbols can be used to join multiple expressions together, and there's really no limit to that, as your filter expressions can be hundreds of characters long. Whilst this means that you can be really specific in identifying participant responses, the longer the expressions becomes, the more likely it is that you're going to need to make use of a number of different types of operators. So in this expression, we're making use of and, a couple of ors, a comma in brackets, we've got another and we've also got the double equals. The problem, however, is that logical expressions can't simply be joined together like this because it could be interpreted in slightly different ways. Let's move on to a slightly simpler example. So I'm looking for the males who are either 18 to 24 or 25 to 39. Q8 will identify the males and Q9 equals 1 or Q9 equals 2 will identify the participants who are 18 to 24 or 25 to 39. The issue here is the fact that I'm using and as well as or in that same sentence, and the two operators are just going to conflict as we don't know which question they're going to apply to. It could be interpreted as either the males 18 to 24 or 25 to 39, or it could perhaps be read as the males who are 18 to 24 or any respondents who are aged 25 to 39. But the good news is that this can all be sorted using brackets. So Q8 equals 1, that's the men, and then the next section is going to be in brackets. So Q9 equals 1 or Q9 equals 2. So we're bracketing the parts of the filter to which the word or applies to. To give another example, let's say we also wanted to include the females who were aged 60 or over. We could start off the same as we did before, but this time I'm going to use the less than symbol, which means that we can already get rid of one set of brackets. I can then add in the females and the 60 plus age category. But this is where we need to be careful, as all the operators, so the ands and the ors, are going to start talking to each other, and suddenly Snap's going to be just as confused as we are. And that's where your brackets come in again. Here the brackets are used to isolate the two parts of the expression, separating those two groups of people. And then I've used an or in the middle to talk to the two groups together. If I was to use and in the middle, I'm asking for people who belong to both of those groups. But I'm looking for anyone who belongs to either the first group or they belong to the second group. And in fact, it's actually impossible to belong to both. And a good way of thinking about brackets is to imagine that they are your arms. The left bracket is your left arm and the right bracket is your right arm. If you see a group of people that you like, give them a hug. And as we saw, more often than not, an individual cannot belong to more than one group, and that's why we've got the or in the middle. If they can belong to both groups, we can use the word and. But the easiest thing to do is to imagine that you were completing this questionnaire yourself at this moment. If you are able to tick both options, use and. If you're only able to choose one option or the other, use or. Okay, so they were some examples of filter expressions used in data analysis. I now wanted to look at some similar expressions which can be used within routing. I'm going to head back into Snap Desktop and I'm going to move into a new survey, which is the customer feedback survey. Looking at question 1, and more importantly question 1a, the please specify, we can see we've actually got some routing set up already. So if I double click on that, we can see that the routing is saying make the please specify pop up if question 1 equals 7, with 7 referring to the word other. If we come down to look at questions 4 and 5, we've got some fairly similar routing setup. So question 4 is asking people to rate various things, so reliability, cleanliness and frequency, and then we have a follow-up question asking for a bit more information regarding the cleanliness. So cleanliness is question 4b. If we look at the routing on question 5, we can say that this question is only going to pop up if the response to question 4b, which was cleanliness, was options 4 or 5. So again, making use of the comma and popping that in brackets. So 4, 5 relating to poor or very poor. So as you can see, very similar expressions to the ones we were using in the analysis a few minutes ago. Now if we head back up to question 1 and 2, as you saw we had routing set up to say that the please specify would only pop up if they chose other. And then looking at question 2, which is how many times did you visit, you can see the text from question 1 is going to be inserted into the question text of question number 2. But if I go ahead and preview this survey, if I initially choose Asda, Morrison's and other, and then within that other box if I type super save, we can see the text is appearing below, so Asda, Morrison's, but we've also got the word other as well as super save. So it's taking all the answers, including the initial other as well as the open text. So to resolve that, if we head back into Snap Desktop, and if I go into my variables window, you can see I have a derived variable waiting for me at the bottom called v1. v1 because it's going to be based on question number 1. So if we take a look at this variable, so it's a multiple response question just like the original question 1, and we have the answers as they were before, so Asda, Marks and Spencer's, Morrison's, etc. And if we turn on toggle, we can see that the data is coming from question number 1. So Q1 equals 1 is Asda, Q1 equals 2 is Marks and Spencer's, all the way down to number 7, which is other. So to confirm, this is the text which is being inserted into the text of question number 2. So we don't want it to say other, so I'm going to take that text out and instead make use of insert and variable field. And I want to take the open-ended text from question 1a and click OK. So the text on question 1a will dynamically be inserted into the response of v1, which also contains the tick box answers from question 1. If I save with the blue tick and head back into the design window, I'm going to replace the dynamic q1 and instead use v1. If I save that and do another preview, again I'll choose Asda, Morrison's and other, and this time you can see it takes the Asda, Morrison's. What it doesn't do is take the word other, it just takes the open-ended comment. And if we carry on through the survey, and if I answer some of these answers, but if I say cleanliness is going to be poor or very poor, we get the additional question 5 popping up. The final example I wanted to show you today was based around displaying sets of questions randomly, which is a question which gets posed quite a bit to our help desk. For this one, I'm going to head back into Snap Desktop, and we're going to move into the course evaluation survey. For this, we will be making use of a variable hiding the background called id.start. That's a question built into each and every questionnaire which automatically records the time that each person starts a survey. I'll be using another derived variable called root. and this one will dictate which of 3 potential routes that people will go based upon what time they clicked on the link. As you can see, I'm making use of id.start, so if anyone starts a survey within the first 20 seconds of any given minute, they're going to go down route number 1. If they start somewhere between 20 seconds and 39 seconds, they're going to go down route number 2. And finally, I'm making use of the term true, which is route number 3. So basically anyone that doesn't fall into category 1 or 2, so route 1 or 2, are going to fall into category 3. Strictly speaking, this isn't actually randomising the routes that they're going to go down, it's just based on what time they start the survey, but it should still produce a fairly good spread of routes taken by each of your respondents. And if we go back to the design window, and if I click on my introduction and look at the routing, you can see that I've got some go to after routing on this introduction. Anyone who answers in the first 20 seconds of any given minute will be taken down route number 1, so they go straight to question number 1. Anyone who chooses to click on the link between 20 to 40 seconds of any given minute will be taken to N3, so that's note number 3, which is just one of my subheaders, and then ultimately they're going to go on to question number 5. And then anyone who doesn't belong to route number 1 or 2 will be taken off to N4. Again, that's just a final subheader I've got, but ultimately moving on to question number 11. If we initially look at route number 1, so they're going to be going on to question 1 to begin with. And just to make it really obvious what's happening today, you can see I've added some blue text with some stars just to sort of make it really obvious what's happening when we go down our different routes. So for this one, we've got question 1, question 2, and question 3, and actually question 4. And then at the end of question 4, there's some additional routing, which is going to send them straight off to N9, which is basically my thank you message. If we come down to route number 2, so starting off with the subheader, so route number 2, we've got question 5, A, B, C and D, as well as 6, question 7, 8, 9 and 9b, so 9b being the last question. And again, looking at the routing, after that question they're going to go off to the thank you message, so N9, and then looking at route number 3, so we've got question 10, 11, 12 and 13, and this time there's no need to put routing on question 13 because it will naturally go off to the thank you message anyway. So that was making use of a derived variable to dictate which question set is going to be used. I mentioned the word random. It's also worth reminding you that we do have a couple of random features within Snap. If I move up to question number 4, one option is to randomize the list of answers in a question. So if I right click on that question, into variable properties, and we have ordering, and we've got the option to randomize that list either random, or you could also make it alphabetic, but randomized means that that list will be in a completely different order each and every time someone sees it. So it just avoids the bias of having access at the top and ended up with a few extra ticks just because a few people are being lazy. We also then have the randomize feature, so moving up the randomize. Now this switches the order of the questions or the order of different sections. So where that differs from what I've just shown you is that with the randomize feature, all the questions or sections do get asked, whereas in my example of using routing and id.start, it was about specifying which questions or sections would be asked and which ones would be skipped. Some other novel ways of deciding upon the participant journey through the questionnaire would be to make use of hidden questions. It might be that you have a spreadsheet in the background of the project which is seeding known information into some hidden questions. So for example, if it was maybe a staff survey or a holiday park, you know that an individual works or stayed at a particular location that had a gym, so you can then route in or out the questions relating to that gym. It might require the use of a derived variable to look at the responses to a variety of questions, some of which might be data from that spreadsheet and some which is given from the live interview, perhaps even performing some calculations along the way. Based on the end result of those answers and calculations, the derived variable is going to be putting those individuals into different groups, and then you can route your questionnaire based on those groups. The possibilities are endless. What we just need to be aware of is making sure that our expressions are doing what we think they're doing. And really that just comes down to checking your use of and versus or, and also making sure that we're reaching out to cuddle our groups with our brackets. Just to finish off, I'm going to pop into Snap Online and show you where you'd apply those analysis filters that we were discussing at the start. I'll head back into the same survey that we were looking at earlier, and if we move straight into the Analyse tab. If we look at the reports first, and I'll begin by looking at the summary dashboard, so these being the reports which are built into each and every survey. You can of course create your own reports. Down the bottom I can then pull up the filters, and just as we did earlier, if I click on the spanner we can use a filter similar to what we did earlier. So question 1 equals 1, so everyone who said yes to that first question. If I click OK and then apply, we can see the filtered report. If I go back into the spanner, there are some useful examples just at the bottom, just giving you some similar examples to we did earlier, using the brackets and making use of and versus or, etc, etc. If you are going to be filtering on certain questions regularly, or perhaps making these reports available to colleagues or clients, you could also set up some pre-built filters back in desktop. Within the reports icon we have external filters. And within here I've got the option to add some of the questions that I want to filter on. So I'm going to take question number 1 today. And I'm also going to add id.date. So similar to id.start that we used earlier, but id.date being the date that they clicked the link. If I click OK and synchronize my changes up to Snap Online, if I go back into Snap Online now, I'll just refresh the tab. I click back on the dashboard report and click on the filters. We have the spanner from before, but there's now a plus, and that allows us to choose which question we want to filter on. Click next, and then it's just a case of ticking a box rather than typing in the expressions that we've been using throughout the day. I could add an additional filter, this time perhaps looking at the date. And if I look at perhaps everyone who stayed in the last few months. So of course the benefit of setting up these predefined filters, it means that you don't have to have any knowledge of filtering expressions to be able to filter the reports. And it's the same process for filtering tables and charts. So if I open up my tables and charts, I've got a couple available to me today, and as before I can open up a chart, back into filters. If I just take off my filters from before and then perhaps choose everyone who said no this time, and you can see the data's changed. Okay, that's everything I had planned to show you for now. I appreciate that some of my example surveys today were perhaps a little crude in the design and wording, but hopefully it has given you an idea of how those different expressions can be used both within your analysis, but also within your questionnaire design. As mentioned, there is plenty of additional support available to you, and I've picked out a couple of specific help pages from our support hub, which will go through a few similar examples that we've been looking at today, but perhaps in a little bit more detail. I've also included a link to last month's Introducing Tables webinar, which includes some elements of filtering and manipulating your data as well. And of course remember that we are always on the end of the phone or email, whether that's accessing our help desk or perhaps booking onto one of our training courses, or if you are short of resources or would just like a little helping hand, our research department can assist you with any aspect of your project, from simple data entry jobs right through to complete project management. If you have got a spare minute, I would be grateful if you'd complete the quick evaluation survey, which can be accessed via the QR code on the right or via the chat on this Teams call. I will be emailing you over the coming days with a recording of today's session, along with a link off to these resources. Thank you for joining me, and we will hopefully see you again soon.